Bonjour à tous. Je remets mes remerciements pour cette invitation. I'm very happy, as Linda said, to share some time speaking French for a change. Both of my godchildren are European, and I had the pleasure to spend 2 lovely years, one in Liège, Belgium, and Wallonie, and one in Paris, France, at the Institut Catholique. And it's a big part of my culture and my identity, so I welcome this invitation. I also welcome the opportunity to speak with you today about something that is very near and dear to my heart. As someone who has spent close to 30 years serving different STEM professions and providing, if you will, the support that we do after someone has finished their formal education, post-secondary education, university studies, because that's what associations do. We keep people connected, we keep people able to progress in their careers once they've finished their university studies. And one of the things that became very clear to me is that women were very underrepresented in almost every discipline. So let's take a look. Excuse me just a minute while I get this open. So as Linda mentioned, my name is Sandra Robert. I am the CEO of the Association for Women in Science. My background is actually in serving both engineers and more recently for the last 6 years, women in science. And my data will really speak more to women in science, although I did look at some data for women in the physical sciences. So if we look at the participation in women in science, and this is for the US, this is taken from the National Science Foundation, we can see overwhelmingly that women are more represented in the life sciences, biology, agriculture, and life sciences. And this data compares 1997 to 2017. You can see that in 1997, in the ag sciences and life sciences, women represented about 26% of the PhDs being given. 20 years later, they were at 40%. So that's pretty good representation and not too far off from parity for men. But when we look at the physical sciences, what we see is different. Women only represented 20 years ago about 12%. And while they've made great strides, 23% is really less than a quarter of the full population. So I would encourage you, if you are not aware of this resource, to visit the American Institute of Physics. I've included, and you're welcome to access these slides afterwards, the statistics that they have on their website, which are much richer and deeper than we'll have the opportunity to do today. But you can see that this is the class, so this is 1975 to 2015. This is what we see as the trajectory of women being involved in the physical sciences. So let's think a little bit more broadly about what are some of these things that cause the equity gap. What we see is that while women make up 50% of the college-educated workforce, we're only seeing them show up in about 28% of the science and engineering workforce. And only 41% of science and engineering research doctorates were awarded to women, as recently as 17. Also, we don't see them being promoted into leadership roles at the same rate that we do men. In the sciences, there are only about 1 in 20 deans and department heads. And women publish less, only about 35% of STEM research publications. And I believe Junming will be hearing from you a little bit more about that specific issue. We also have, and we can't avoid talking about the fact that women undergo a number of forms of harassment, including sexual harassment, which needs to be talked about and understood. And then from a patent disparity perspective, only 12% of science and technology patents are awarded to women. So let's think a bit about some of the disproportionate barriers that they face. I think we've called these also, you've used a different word, but I would call them barriers. I think hindrances is what you've used. There's the concept of implicit and explicit bias, which often keeps women from getting advanced and recognized at the same way and level that men do. Pay inequity. Sometimes women, if they're not making an equal wage, will ask whether it's worth it to keep going in the profession. And particularly for women of color and women from other diverse backgrounds, they're often asked to take on additional advising loads and teaching loads. because they may be the only, say, Black person, or they may be the only Asian person on faculty. So they're asked then to advise all those who may look like them in the student body. They may receive fewer speaking invitations. And then there are other forms of marginalization, including access to networks of influence, lack of sponsors, mentors, and allies. And from my own background, I remember that as I was coming up, I often did not get included in the conversations among men. And I've seen this change over the past 25 or so years, but it's still something that needs to be addressed, because if women aren't included in the conversations, it's very hard for them to participate. There's the additional concern about flexibility given to the caregiver roles they have to take at home. This may be caring for children. It may increasingly be elder care. And then more frequent discrimination and harassment, which we see as being even greater for those from marginalized communities, such as the BIPOC and LGBTQ+ communities. BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, People of Color, if you're not familiar with the acronym. So one of the things that I think is important, as I mentioned earlier, is to create and foster a more complete understanding of what sexual harassment really means and where it shows up. And this is a slide that you can access at the National Academies Press, which shows you at this public consciousness line what we really think about as sexual harassment. And really, if you look below the waterline, how much deeper it is. I won't go through each of these individually, but it's really worth reflection if you haven't thought about these. Sometimes it's name calling or not inviting people to be involved in meetings, calling them by names that keep them from participating. So an important consideration if we want to really advance women. I think too, one of the things that, as Linda and I talked about this presentation that could be helpful to think about is what is the role of both AWIS and other science societies, and there are many of them. I participate in a group monthly that has 60 of myself and my peers representing different science societies. So there are many of them who can be accessed to provide support in this area, and we partner a lot among each other. It's the idea of advocacy, and we have a specific partnership of about 120 societies that are addressing sexual harassment in STEM, looking at things like code of conduct at meetings, et cetera, as ways and resources that we can share to really reduce this issue that we know is very prevalent. We also provide opportunities for our members to get together and to talk about their issues, to share a network, and then to also share and continue to distribute anti-racist resources. It's certainly not lost on many of us, I'm sure, that over the last couple of weeks, seeing what happened to the Asian community and many episodes over the past year of looking at increasing emphasis on Black murders and police brutality. And these are social issues that are very deep, but they don't stay away from women, and we have to be aware of making sure people understand racism and what it looks like so that they can move forward. Recognition is another part of what we do. We do this through member resources, a magazine, as do many of our peers, and then career advancement. I think scholarships and grants, we provide one specifically to women in the physical sciences, as well as others to help women in post-secondary PhD programs, trainings and other events that we do, and then having career centers available. I think science societies also do quite a lot in the area of thought leadership by both helping policymakers and others, and also to really provide trends, much as I did earlier in the presentation, about what are the data telling us, as well as some of the social norms that help us advance. Organizational partnerships is something I think we'll also be exploring in our Q&A later on today's presentation. So this leads me to share with you kind of some thoughts that I have about actions we can take as individuals. We often talk about needing to change systems, but in order to change systems, we really need to think about what we need to do to change our individual behaviors. For those of you who have heard the term allyship, but haven't really looked at what that could mean, I would recommend Melinda Epler's TED Talk. I think it gives a great opportunity to dig into that. To look at how we can include women so that they can speak up and be included at the table. To each of us making a commitment to promoting qualified women when we learn of job openings, either in our organizations or in other places. Making sure to introduce women into our networks and include them in the conversation so that they can build their own networks. Getting to know other associations who can provide us with links to more diverse populations. And I think this is particularly important because when we go to fill jobs, if our networks look like us and only like us, then we're not accessing the diversity that is available in the talent pool. And then also, I think it's incumbent upon each of us to find the reason why equity and inclusion is very important to us. And it might be more at the business imperative side of things. It could be wanting to see, which is my case, women represented at parity with men. But it could also be wanting to see more women who look like each of us represented in the sciences. I think an additional comment I would make is to listen and to seek to understand rather than putting our own point of view out there as being the right one or the only one, really seeking to understand the perspectives of women and those from underserved communities by really asking them questions and trying to understand their barriers specifically. So again, thank you for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be invited to this conversation. I look forward to the rest of the program, and here's my contact information for staying involved. I've also included some data and statistical resources which you might find helpful.